Okay, we are looking at lesson 3 here, and lesson 3 is really our introduction to right angle triangles and working with something called Pythagorean theorem. So hopefully you've come across right angle triangles in the past. This triangle we see here is a right angle, and the way we know that is not only because it looks like a right angle, but it will always have this little square that you see in that bottom corner there. So Pythagorean's theorem is one of the most famous mathematical theorems, and really what it helps us to do is if we have two sides of a right angle triangle, like this one, if we had a 4 and a 3, then we can always figure out what the missing side value is using Pythagorean's theorem. So it's a very famous theorem, and it looks something like this. It's like c squared equals a squared plus b squared. And a squared and b squared, they don't really matter too much. The big thing is this thing called c. C is what we call our hypotenuse. And for many of you, that might be a new word, this word called hypotenuse. What hypotenuse means, hypotenuse is very simply the side that is opposite our right angle. So, a good definition to remember, we're going to come back to this word an awful lot over the next couple days. So, if we have our little triangle that we have to our left, this 4, 3, and then we don't know the other side, first thing we want to do is figure out, okay, well, what is our hypotenuse? So our hypotenuse is the side that is opposite our right angle. So in this triangle, it's not hard to figure out that this side would be our hypotenuse because it is opposite our right angle. See how it's opposite that right angle? It's the farthest one away. So that is our hypotenuse. Now, another good trick to figure out if I give you any triangle, what side is my hypotenuse? It is the longest side. Now, if you just took a look at this triangle, it wouldn't be hard to tell that the hypotenuse is definitely longer than the side that's 4 units long or longer than the side that's 3 units. And that's always going to be true. Your hypotenuse is always going to be the longest side in your diagram. So, how do we use this formula? The biggest thing to remember is this hypotenuse, which is going to be our key value. It is always c. So when we're using this formula, we always have to put the value of our hypotenuse in c. So how would we do it here? Well, let's start. So if we have our formula, c squared equals a squared plus b squared, just like we showed up top, first thing we want to do is figure out, okay, well, what is our c squared? That's our hypotenuse. And that's actually the only value we don't know. That's what we're going to solve for. So because we don't have a number for it, we're just going to leave it as c squared right now. But the next parts are great. A squared and b squared. Those can be any of these sides that you'd like. So you can choose to make 4 the letter A, or you can choose to make 3 the letter A. It doesn't matter. As long as our other sides are A and B. You could have switched up that A and B however you'd like. The important part to remember is the hypotenuse has to be C. We don't have a choice. Okay, so we got that covered. So let's go back to our formula. So it says c squared equals a squared plus b squared. Our a squared, our a is 4, so we're going to have 4 squared plus our b value, which is 3, so we'll put that in our formula, 3 squared. Perfect. Now, using your calculator, we can start figuring out what our right side is going to be. So we'll leave that as c squared. We can't do anything to that right now. Equals 4 squared plus 3 squared. So you could do this in a couple of steps if you want. You could do it on your calculator and say 4 squared is 16 plus 3 squared, which is 9. And you could write that out. Or you could just do this all right away in your calculator. I'd recommend just putting that 4 squared plus 3 squared directly in your calculator. And that's going to give you a value of 25. Perfect. Now, what I see students do all the time is they say, okay, great, I solved for C. That means my hypotenuse is C, and it definitely doesn't. Because right now, this tells us that C squared equals 25, and that's not what we care about. We care only about C. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to do the opposite of what squaring is. And this might be the first time you've ever done this, but you're going to need to use your square root key on your calculator. So what you're going to do is you're going to use your square root on this side. You're going to square root on that side. What you do to one side, always have to do the other. We know that in math. So when we take the square root of c squared, that just gets us down to our regular c value. That's what we wanted to figure out in the first place. And if you do square root of 25 on your calculator, the calculator is going to think, okay, what times itself gives you 25? That's what square root means. What times itself gives you a number? So here, square root of 25, well, 5 times itself is going to give you that number. We don't have to think about it. We're lucky. We have calculators. It'll do it for us. So in this big calculation we just did, we figured out the value of our hypotenuse is indeed 5. Nice and easy. So the next time we do this, we should be really quick at it. So if I had another triangle right here, and I had a 1, a 2, and then I don't know, and here's my little right angle, well, now we should be able to do it. So now I'm going to encourage you to pause the video and try to do this one on your own. Give you a second. And hopefully you tried it. So let's take a look at how we did. So we'll have c squared equals a squared plus b squared. By now, very first thing we should be doing is we should be labeling our hypotenuse. We know our hypotenuse is right here. That's going to be our c value. Then we can go ahead and make whatever we'd like our a and our b. So I'm going to make this my a. I'm going to make this my b. And your triangle should always look like that. You should always have your c as opposite of your right angle. So we have that. So we don't know what our value of c is. We're going to leave that blank for now. So c squared equals a squared, and here our value of a is 1. So we'll have 1 squared plus b squared, which is 2 squared. So we'll put our 2 squared in there. And just like I said before, we want to make sure that we do that right away in our calculator. So when we do that, we're going to get c squared equals 5 squared, but well, that is not our final answer at all. What did we do before? Well, last time we square rooted, so this time we're going to do the same thing. We're going to square root this side, we're going to square root that side. When we do that, we get c equals, and the square root of 5 squared is about 2.23. So that is going to be the value of our hypotenuse. So looks like we got a pretty good handle on that. We could do that all day and have no problem. So let's step it up and get a little more complicated here. So what we're going to do on the next one is we're going to solve for a different side. So let's say we have this triangle that looks like this. And we're going to say this is 4, this is 5, and we're going to leave that side blank right now. Okay, well, we can try to figure this out. So what we're going to do is we're going to write down our formula to start. C squared equals a squared plus b squared. And now what we want to do is, very first thing, we always want to label all of our sides. So we know our hypotenuse is opposite, that's going to be our c. And then we can say our 4 is going to be our a. And then, well, we don't really know what our b value is going to be. And that's kind of an issue. But it's okay, we can go ahead and we can solve for it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, we have our values, so let's put them in. So c squared is going to be 5 squared equals our a squared, which is 4 squared, plus our b squared. We don't know what that is, so we'll just leave it as b squared for now. And now we can do some stuff on our calculators here, right? So we can put 5 squared in our calculator, that's going to give us 25. We can put 4 squared in our calculator, that's going to give us 16. And then we still don't know what b squared is, so we'll just have to leave that. And now, just like we always do in math, to solve for a variable, we need to isolate that variable. So what we're going to do is we're going to move that 16 over to the other side of our equal sign. And when that happens, that positive 16 becomes negative 16. So we get 25 minus 16 equals b squared. Okay, keep cleaning this up. 25 minus 16 on your calculator is going to give you 9, and that will equal b squared. And now we just need to take the square root, just like we did before. We'll take the square root of b squared to get it down to b. And we'll take the square root of 9 to get it down to what we need it to be. Square root of 9 is going to be 3. So we have our new value. 3 is going to equal our b value there. So we now know a couple things. We can solve for our missing hypotenuse value. It's nice and easy. And we can also solve for our missing sides. It doesn't matter what side we're missing. All we have to do is just move everything over and isolate for that variable. So following these examples, I encourage you to watch these examples and try them again. We should be able to solve for any right angle triangle that we might have. Okay? Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a word problem. So we're going to have a problem here, and I'm just going to announce our word problem, where we have a house. Let me draw a nice little house here. Oh, it's a good looking house. I'm going to give it a nice little window and a door. Nice little roof. Perfect. So we have our house. And now what we have is we have a ladder. And this ladder, right there, 6 feet tall. And now the other thing we know is we took a tape measure and we measured this distance down here. How far away that ladder is from our house. And we said that that is 2 feet away. So what we want to do is we want to figure out, okay, what is this distance up here? We want to figure out how far up the house that ladder goes. That is going to be our unknown. So word problems are always a little bit scary because we're looking at a house, we're looking at a ladder, we're not looking at triangles, but we can definitely make this diagram into something we're familiar with. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this triangle here, and I'm just going to redraw it over here. So here's that triangle zoomed in. We know that this was 2 feet. We know that this is 6 feet. We know that this is our right angle because it makes that angle with the house. So now this is something we're a lot more familiar with. So we know that 6 is our hypotenuse. That's going to be our C value. 2 we can just say is our A, and then our unknown, we don't know what it is, so we'll just make it B. And now we can go ahead and we can use the formula that we're used to. So we have C squared equals A squared plus B squared, and I'll just go through this very, very fast. C is 6, we have 6 squared equals A squared, which is 2 squared plus B squared, and then using your calculator, we'll have 36 equals 2 squared, which is 4, plus B squared. If we bring that over to isolate for our B, 36 minus 4 equals B squared, and 36 minus 4 is 32, and that's going to equal our B squared value. Now what we do is we do the same thing as we've done before. We square root both sides. Remember, that's a very important step. Do not forget that. I know some of you will, and I encourage you, please double check, make sure you're not forgetting that. So when we do that square root, we get 5.66 equals the value of B. So if I asked you, how high up the house does that ladder go? Well, you could be able to figure that out. You'd say, okay, well, it goes 5.66 feet up that house. And that is all about Pythagorean's theorem. Knowing this, we should be able to solve any problem I throw at you. But now let's move on to part 2. And part 2 is the good stuff because this is going to really help us for the next 2-3 days after this. So quite a bit of material. The next thing we're going to be looking at is our right angle triangles, and specifically looking at 3 things. Our hypotenuse, our opposite, and our adjacent. And we know what these words mean already. Hypotenuse is always farthest from the right angle. Perfect. And then opposite, really no other way to describe it, it's going to be opposite our angle, and adjacent is going to be beside our angle. And now this probably shouldn't mean a whole lot to you just yet, but I want to encourage you, take another look at this. This is going to be really important because we're about to get into how do we use this stuff. So let's say I gave you a triangle that looks like this, and this is our right angle, and I said, okay, let's look at the triangle from here. So we'll say this is our angle of interest. Some people call it the reference angle. Some people call it the perspective, but we'll just call it our angle of interest. So this is where we're looking at our triangle from. So now what we are focusing on here is we want to label all of these different things. And we should be really good at labeling one side already. We should be able to label our hypotenuse right off the bat because we just did it. It's opposite our right angle. So we know our hypotenuse is going to go over there. So we have our hypotenuse done. The next thing we want to do is we want to label our opposite side. So our opposite side, we only have two sides left. We have this side and we have that side. So taking a look at it, what side do you think is opposite our angle? Hopefully we got that right. The opposite side would be farthest away from our angle, and the other side is our adjacent side. Adjacent means next to. And that makes sense because this side over here, our adjacent side, take a look. It is literally next to our angle. It's literally touching it. So this is how we are going to label our right angle triangles. So let's take a look at another one. So if I had this triangle here, and I said go ahead and label this, you should be able to do that. You should be able to start with, okay, hypotenuse is opposite my right angle, and then I need to label my opposite and adjacent. Well, I know that adjacent is always beside my angle of interest. Here it is. And then opposite is going to be the farthest side away from that angle. So here's my opposite side. And this thing is done. That's nice and labeled. Now, hopefully when I throw some numbers in here, it doesn't disturb you. Let's take a look. So if I had this triangle now, and we're looking from this angle, and I had the numbers 3, 4, 5, and I asked you, what is the opposite? Well, what would you be able to tell me? Well, I always recommend, no matter what you are doing, first thing you should do is label your triangle. So just as there's numbers, still go ahead and put my hypotenuse, my opposite, and my adjacent. That's very important. We always want to label these right angle triangles because soon we're going to be working with some fractions. So if I asked you, what is our opposite? Well, you should be able to tell me that value is definitely 3. Or if I asked you, what is my adjacent? Well, then you should be able to tell me that value is 4. And then if I ask you something a little trickier, maybe like, what is your adjacent divided by your hypotenuse? Well, then you'd have to take a look and say, okay, well, my adjacent is 4, my hypotenuse is 5, so then if I do 4 divided by 5 on my calculator, that's going to give me 0.8. And that's really what these kind of triangles are trying to get to. Eventually, we're trying to get all the way down here. So you're going to have 1 or 2 questions in your homework that are about this, and then 1 in your quiz later on today that are about this as well. So make sure you are doing your homework. You are checking these solutions online. You're making sure you know how to do this stuff because your quiz is no joke. Your quiz, like always, you're going to get some attempts. You want to make sure you are putting your best effort in. So take your time, draw sketches, do whatever you got to do. Make sure you are getting the best grade you possibly can. All right? Thank you very much for listening. We will see you guys later.